Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And last week, we ended Daredevil Yellow by saying, not even we know what's coming
Spider-Man.
next.
Spider-Man
Blue. By saying, not even we know what's coming next. Although, I think about 5 minutes after that episode ended, we landed on our new one, which is Romulus from Image Comics in 2016, 2017. I think the final trade publication was 2017.
Yep.
And so today we're going to do an intro to this spoiler-free. Well, the only spoiler is that the series, tragically never finished. But
it's over, but the story isn't. It doesn't wrap in any way whatsoever. Like there's not even like it really isn't even a satisfying end. Would you say? I mean,
this story
we'll get into
arc is completed. Like what?
That's fair. That's
the
fair.
4 issues, like what she's trying to do over those 4 issues, she does.
What they set
like,
up. Her, yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's just dipping your toe in the shallow end of the pool.
Yeah.
But
we'll get into that next week when we talk about the book itself. But
yeah,
like Mike said, it's only 4 issues. Issue 1, dated October 2016. Issues 1 through 3 came out October, November, December 2016, and then there was a big gap to issue 5. It was issue 4. I'm sorry. It was May 2017 before issue 4 came out, and then the trade, which is listed as volume 1, was July 2017, and even the solicit for issue 4 starts with end of story arc. So the idea at the time was that it was going to be an ongoing.
And they did the classic Image thing of the trade says volume 1 on it.
Well, it always does. Yes,
I know.
Yeah.
Kyle Starks was telling us about that. By the way, I know we both have it in single issue, but do you also have it in trade?
I do not. No, I have single issue only.
So when I got to the end, and I remembered the end, when I got to the end in the trade, the next page says chapter 5.
Extras, yeah.
Which is it's full of like journal entries from the characters of the story moving forward.
Yeah.
And some cool art. And it's like, man, Bryan Hill really had a plan for this. But
okay, so
being Bryan Hill, we should talk about Bryan Hill.
Well, so real quick though, that back matter at least is in the single issues. It's spread out.
I haven't opened them for a while.
It's spread out there, but that's specifically saying issue 5 or chapter 5 extra. I mean, that is, unless they're saying chapter 5 of the book is the extras. That's interesting. I don't know, but a lot of that back matter, a lot of it is some of the character art design and things like that. And yeah, the journal entries, like telegrams, newspaper articles, things like that. Yeah. Out of the journal and things. Yeah.
It's a lot of text to read.
And it's one of those things that it's clear that they put so much thought into the world that they're going to create all this back matter. When you create fictional memos and letters and notes and pages from journals and all that stuff,
I think you and I have both read a lot of intentionally 4-issue arcs.
Yes.
And we've read a lot of longer arcs. Yeah. This reads like the first 4 issues of a much longer story.
Absolutely. Because there is really no conclusion there. But as I said, so it does show that there had to have been, I mean, aside from the fact that when you get to the end of issue 4, it's very clear that that something's coming next. Outside of the feeling from the story, seeing all that back matter again it's proof that they put so much work into building the world and building the mythology, the lore of it, that it obviously wasn't meant to just be 4 issues. Like that's a lot of work just to get to 4 issues and not go on. So in some ways it's credit to the creators. But when you're left hanging like that as a reader, there's a level of disappointment, really. It is, if you pick this book up and especially if you picked it up as it was coming out. And I guess even if you pick it up in trade now and you read again, you see volume 1, as you mentioned, Kyle Starks said that everything they put out is always volume 1 because everything could potentially come back. But I think even when we talked to Kyle, if you go back and listen to that interview, the stuff that he put out that was only 1 volume, it felt like one story. Yes, it shed light on the idea that those worlds and stories could continue on, but they all wrapped up in one story. They
Right.
wrapped up in the one trade. Romulus doesn't do that. You get to the end of this, and it is clear that was just chapter one, right?
Well, and the stuff in the book, which we'll talk about next week when we
Yeah.
actually dive into the content, you could pick up right where you left off. Like if they wrote volume 2
Oh,
this year,
yeah.
every social, societal, power play type issue, conspiracies, like all of that stuff is still very much relevant.
In
Maybe
some
more
ways,
so.
that's exactly what I was going to say. In some ways, it could be. There's a way to spin it where it is even more relevant now, but we'll get to that next week. You started talking about the creators. We might as well talk about that. Romulus was created by writer Bryan Edward Hill and artist Nelson Blake II. These are guys that when you look at their CVs, when you look at the work that they've done, Bryan Edward Hill has written for pretty much most every major publisher. He's got a fair amount of Marvel and DC work, but the majority of his stuff that he's known for is from Image, specifically on the Top Cow imprint. Same with Nelson Blake II. They did a lot of work at Image on Top Cow. Now, we talked a little bit about this when we did the intro for Ex Machina. Brian came on and Tony
Right.
Harris. That book was on Wildstorm. We talked about the history of Wildstorm, how it was one of the original founding studios at Image, started by Jim Lee and Mike Che. When Image started, again, it was artists first, and so each of the original founders founded their own studio to put out their books, and then they started hiring and bringing on talent to work on those books and expand their lines, and each one of those studios would kind of be like a self-contained universe, and so Top Cow was the studio started by Mark Silvestri. Mark Silvestri, he had coming out of Marvel again, like a lot of those artists, having done a lot of work on X-Men. He was I think of him most notably as an X-Men artist. He was drawing the original Inferno storyline with Madeline Pryor, for people that know the X-Men, with Radicus Claremont. But he started Top Cow, and that is his imprint, that he runs over at Image. And Bryan Edward Hill and Nelson Blake II, they both came in and really started working on a lot of those books. But before we get to some of those ideas, I mean, I mentioned that Bryan Edward Hill has done a lot of work at Marvel and DC. He's writing currently at Marvel, as we record this right now, 2 series. He's writing Ultimate Black Panther under the new Ultimate Universe, which across the line has been really, really great. And Ultimate Black Panther is really, really cool. It's the first time that T'Challa has had his own book in an alternate/ultimate universe over at Marvel. So he's been writing. It was
also
right
the second title they released in the Ultimate, right? It was like
I think so.
Ultimate Spider-Man, Black Panther, then X-Men.
I think so. Yeah.
That's some elite company in terms of characters.
Yeah.
And to be one of the 3 writers, because it's you got Hickman on Spider-Man because he launched the whole Ultimate verse.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next writer they pick, is Bryan Edward Hill.
Yeah.
Who I said he just lists as Bryan Hill these days.
Yeah. Some of his early stuff is Bryan Edward Hill. Brian, if you see that, it's the same guy. But yeah, Ultimate Black Panther has been awesome. He's also going to be writing a new Blade series, Blade Red Band. Red Band is depending on when you listen to this, Red Band could have been completely disappeared and memory hold from Marvel Comics, but it's basically you think about how the term red band, the phrase red band, like a red band trailer, and that's like the unrated trailer. So usually it means it's a lot more violent. There's cursing, things like that. In comics, what Marvel is doing is anything that's labeled as red band or has a red band variant is basically it's just a lot more bloody. That's literally all it comes. It's the same story, but like how characters die, whether they're important or just like goons and henchmen, it's just a lot bloodier. That's all it is. It's fitting for a Blade book being, part vampire. So he's writing that book right now. He's also written a Blade series over at Marvel, also Midnight Suns, starring Blade, Killmonger. So you can start getting a little bit of a picture right there in terms of the types of characters. Bryan Hill is African-American writer. He writes a lot of African-American characters. That makes a lot of sense. He also wrote Fallen Angels, which is the miniseries, one of the 6 launch titles that came out of the new Krakoan era after House of X and Powers of 10. Back in 2019 when the X Office was soft rebooted. Fallen Angels was one of the 6 launch titles. It was a miniseries. May have been the weakest of the launch titles. It wasn't a great premise, but it did set up another book called Hellions, which was written by Zeb Wells, which was really good. So while Fallen Angels wasn't that great, what came after did work, kind of work really well for me at least.
Yeah, and by the way, I've tried to look up to see if I could find any interviews with Bryan Hill or anything like that, because I noticed the same thing as I was looking at his League Comic Geeks. I was like, he's a black writer. There's a lot of black characters, and makes sense why Marvel and DC would go after him. I mean, he's a talented writer first and foremost, but when you also get the representation in a character that has historically been written by white people trying to synthesize the black experience, that can be problematic, especially these days. But I also wondered if, like Christopher Priest, when he took the character Deathstroke in 2016, like apparently DC called him for the Rebirth line, and they were like, "Hey, Chris, if you got time, we'd love to write a character." He's like, "As long as it's not a black character, I'm so tired of being the token black writer." And I was like, "Oh, I kind of wonder if Bryan Hill is starting to feel that." But then you look at his creator-owned stuff, and it's like, you don't see that in the creator-owned stuff. But it does seem like Marvel and DC still tap him for that. Not necessarily a bad thing. Just
that's exactly where I was going with it. That it is a double-edged sword when you're a minority as a non-straight white male. Like, this is something that you see a lot also with women writers, like someone like a legend like Gail Simone or Kelly Thompson right now, Becky Cloonan, these characters that, yes, they've written great stories starring great female characters, but like Becky Cloonan had a great run writing Moon Knight. Gail Simone has written everything. She writes Batman great. She writes Superman great. But they can also do other things. And so, yes, while as a consumer, I think at least myself as well, you want these characters to be written from an authentic point of view, which oftentimes dictates someone with a similar world experience, life experience, but at the same time, they shouldn't be limited to that,
Yeah.
So it's a matter of maybe that's how you make your name, but then, what Christopher Priest says, you don't want to be typecast in that way where you're only writing those characters where you can, we have a black character. These are the 5 people we call, and one of them will probably say yes. Like that's the wrong way to do it. Even though the intention there is right.
Right. Yeah. And it's like a small but very important misstep.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I was just thinking of Erica Schultz, who we've had on the podcast.
Yeah.
Was sharing some of her public shaming when it was announced that she would be working on a Daredevil title.
Yeah.
People were saying things like, "Oh, here comes woke Daredevil" or something, and it's like, I'm sorry, what? Like, and the standard is that she's a woman writer, so she needs to stay in her lane, basically.
Yes.
And around the same time, Tom King was announced to be on Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
No one said anything.
Yes,
exactly. It's like, and they're both talented writers. They're both writing across the gender spectrum, but it's totally fine for white dudes to go write whatever they want because that's been the industry norm as long as it's existed.
And the flip side of that is like, she's a woman, she's going to be right. Oh, of course, she's writing the Elektra Daredevil, of course, right. But then, as we talked to her about, like she is writing Rat City, which is a story spun off from the Spawn universe. It's not a woman there. And the criticism there, of course, is, well, what's a woman doing writing this character?
Right.
So it's lose for non-white dudes when they're, specifically in this case, writers, when they're trying to write these characters and find their voices. It's a lose. But again, so I and we're not here to comment on what Bryan Hill's intentions are, what his motivations are.
I only brought it up because I'm just curious. Like, if he got offered a spot to write Batman, I'm sure he's got a Batman story.
Well, see,
in the hopper.
This is what I'm getting at. I was just about to jump across the street to DC. He has written Batman. He wrote a run on he wrote a run on Detective Comics, but that Detective Comics run, who did it guest star? It guest starred Black Lightning. Now, part of that,
though, the Signal.
I said, but no, okay, hold on to that, because what spun out of his five,
Batman and
six
the
issue
Outsiders.
run
Yeah.
was Batman of the Outsiders. Included on that team was the Signal. So Duke
Oh,
Thomas was there. Pierce was there. So yeah, so but he's given that he has that chance to write those characters, and he writes them well. That was the detective run was a cool little story there. Also over at DC, he wrote a book called Michael Cray, which is under like the kind of the rebooted new Wildstorm universe when DC brought those characters back 6-7 years ago now at this point, something like that. He also did a really, really cool book that was one of the last books that came out with the Vertigo imprint on its cover, which is called American Carnage. He did this book with Leandro Fernandez. Leandro Fernandez, who is the artist on one of my favorite creator-owned books called The Old Guard, a book with Greg Rucka, which is the reason why I picked up American Carnage, because I loved The Old Guard. American Carnage is a crazy intense book about a white passing African American ex FBI agent who, in an effort to try to regain his status, goes undercover, joining a white supremacist group who they think is responsible for the death of another FBI agent. Um, and this sounds like a wildly woke book in the trails of something like Black Lives Matter or whatnot. This book came out in 2017, 2018. Sorry, 2018, 2019. So, the issues that are talking about here, I know a lot of people like to think that they only started in 2020. They've been going on for a long time. But American Carnage it's a great book, but again, super, super intense. And so that's very much like it's effectively a creator-owned thing. Again, being on Vertigo.
right.
It's non-superhero. It's not part of any larger IP. These are original characters, original ideas, original world. But still, even that there's a story about race and race relations in America. Clearly, one that he wanted to tell, and like I said, it's really, really, really good. Um,
Yeah.
n-
Well, and speaking of his indie stuff, which I know has got to be next on your list,
yeah,
but huge indie title, at Image with Postal.
yeah, that's where I was going
Um,
next. Yep, yep,
and
yep.
then, the one that I think breaks the mold for me the most, but was very enjoyable was Chariot over at AWA.
I was going to mention that I have that one here.
It's
Listing when you get down
basically
there, but because
souped up
that's
Knight Rider nostalgia, and it's so good.
I own it. It's in my to be read pile. I've had it
Oh,
for a
maybe
couple
we
years
should
now.
just bump that up and tag this, make it a small Bryan Edward Hill
Yeah,
month.
yeah. But so you mentioned Postal, and Postal was really great. It ran for a decent amount of time. He co-created that with another writer named Matt Hawkins, and the artist Isaac Goodhart. It's worth mentioning that um because all his image books come out on the Top Cow imprint from Top Cow Studios. Postal ended up being part of a kind of a mini connected universe with two other books that were written by Matt Hawkins, the guy he co-wrote Postal with. Two books called The Tithe and Think Tank. And they did a little a little 3-issue crossover called Eden's End. Eden being the name of the town where Postal is set in. But
Right.
it's kind of a mini crossover there. And it's interesting to think that if Romulus had gone on, that it really could have maybe fit into that. Like if Romulus could have gone on, and all of a
Interesting.
sudden it was a crossover with either the Tithe or Think Tank. I think it's totally within the realm of possibility that they could have been part of that little mini shared universe. But yeah, they're it's where he's done most of his work. It's probably I'm sure if you look up his credits, it's probably the series he has the most issues on, whether it's for hire work at Marvel or DC or a creator-owned book. I think Postal is the number one there. He also worked on one of the reboots of Cyberforce. Cyberforce was the first book that Top Cow put out. That was Mark Silvestri's, like, he said all the creators put out their first book, right? Where it was Spawn with Todd McFarlane, it was Wildcats with Jim Lee, Youngblood with Rob Liefeld. Silvestri's book was Cyberforce, and there was a reboot in I don't know, there's been a number of them. He did one of them a handful of years ago. Again, he did that with Matt Hawkins. So yeah, again, those are all guys who were in the stable at Image Top Cow. You already mentioned Chariot at AWA. The last thing I'll mention, he has done some work over at Boom in the Buffyverse. He's written, I think, an Angel miniseries and an Angel and Spike miniseries. Both those book with artist Gleb Melnikoff, who's doing a lot of DC work right now. But I mean, if you're going to know Bryan Hill from something, probably it's Postal. If you know something from DC, it's going to be probably Batman and the Outsiders. If you know him from Marvel, it's probably either Blade or the Killmonger series, which is pretty cool as well. Unless you're reading
right now,
all the Black Panther. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much what Bryan Hill has been doing, what he has going. And like I said, right now his current books are both over at Marvel. So which I'm very excited about because Ultimate Black Panther has been awesome. So yeah, it's good to see that he's still working out over there and kind of knocking him out. We mentioned the artist and co-creator of Romulus, Nelson Blake II. He again he's kind of been like it's clear from his credits he's kind of an Image Top Cow guy, like he's in their bullpen, which means he's done a lot of Witchblade universe stuff, which is a book coming also out of Top Cow, on top of doing again, Romulus was also on Top Cow. Over at Marvel, he did a Luke Cage series, which I guess maybe is surprised that Bryan Edward Hill has not written the Luke Cage story. But again, maybe that's just me profiling and typecasting in there. But Nelson Blake II has done. He did do a little Luke Cage miniseries. He also did the covers for a run on Miss Marvel, not the interiors, covers only, for issues 14 through 20 of the second Kamala Khan series. Then obviously Marvel renumbers a lot. This was the renumbering after Secret Wars in 2015 with a new number 1. But he did the covers for a whole story arc there, which was very, very cool to see. Done a handful of books, and I'm talking like single digit number books for places like DC, IDW, AWA. He also did some work on some G.I. Joe stuff over at Devil's Due, which was where the G.I. Joe properties was in between Marvel and IDW. So it's non-canonical stuff as far as the larger G.I. Joe universe is concerned, but he did some work on that when it was over at Devil's Due. So those are our two main creators. The last credited creator is the letterer, Tony. I'm going with Pettery.
Yeah, your guess is as good, if not better, than mine.
It's Petteri. So my instinct is that it can't be Pettery or Petery. So
Petery sounds wrong.
Petery sounds wrong. Yeah.
Accent.
So Pettery is what I'm kind of going with, I guess. He's the letterer. Again, he most of his credits are at Image, and specifically Image Top Cow. So he's one of the guys that they use. There are also a bunch of books he's done at Image. The ones that jumped out to me were some of the ones that were books that were written, or I guess co-written by Kyle Higgins and Alex Siegel. Books like Cowl, Hadrian's Wall, which are Image books, but I don't believe those are Top Cow. He'd done a lot of work at Dynamite as well, specifically a lot of Kiss and Vampirella titles, which can't speak to how good or bad those comics are, but he's done a lot of work there. And then also a ton at DC. Like he's currently lettering the ongoing Green Arrow series and Batman Off-World, which is a miniseries written by Jason Aaron. Did the recent Robin series, the Night Terrors miniseries that was just on the event. So he's done a lot of work at DC. And then after that, that's pretty much it. Handful of titles at like Marvel. Really, Marvel was late 90s to like late aughts, early 2010s. I don't think he's done an ongoing Marvel book or Marvel book at all. Like a new Marvel book. I don't think he's done in like 10 or 12 years. So it's mostly over at DC and Image right now where you're going to find his letter.
Yeah. By the way, we should also mention that Bryan Hill also writes for TV, including the Titans show.
True. Yes, he did. Yeah.
Which I never maybe watched like the first episode, but I knew like watching the trailer, I was like, it looks well done, yada, yada, but it doesn't really look like my thing.
It was fine. It was fine for what it was. I think once it got out of its own way early on, it got better.
Yeah, it was for me more that it went like the supernatural bent.
Well, yes, yeah,
Um, and I would have preferred like a street level Titan thing first before escalating to
yeah. Well,
um
but
yeah, it's
Trigon demons and things like that. That's very much in the Titans' wheelhouse.
yep.
Aliens
Oh, for sure. No, it was
with Corey and all that. So
totally fair. And honestly, there's only so much street level. Like I
yeah,
want, but like I guess my thing is anything that can be street level. Like if you're ever going to do a street level story, you need to do that first before you escalate to the
that's
supernatural
true. Yeah,
things.
you don't want them to go back to a quote unquote lower level stakes.
Right. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, now we're fighting demons and close the mouth of hell on earth. And
now
now
it's
we gotta
gangsters.
bust this drug guy. Yeah.
Yeah. That is true. I don't have his credits there, but yeah, Brian Hill has done work in both TV and film as well, screenwriter, TV writer, all of that. But obviously we're focused here on the comics. So yeah, so Brian Hill, Nelson Blake II, and Troy Pettery, the our creative team. That's pretty much it. Those are the guys that make up our team here for Romulus.
Yeah. So should we jump over to the book itself?
Yeah,
I'll read the synopsis from Image, and
sure.
then perhaps we'll just say, here's how we came to it, here's why we want to talk about it, and then
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
done till next week.
yeah.
Okay, so this is for Romulus Volume 1, trade paperback, solicitation from Image. I don't have the first issue solicitation because they don't have that on their website anymore. But here's what it says. Our world isn't free. All of us, for generations, have lived under the secret control of the ancient order of Romulus. One young woman, raised by them, trained by them, betrayed by them, must push through her fear to take a stand against the silent evil that masters our world. Her name is Ashlar, and her war begins with the brutal first chapter of the new Image series, Romulus. That's extremely,
Tough read. It's a tough
extremely
read.
tough right
Yeah,
there at the end. I
yeah.
bet it's true. It's just
Yeah,
like everything about this is just dripping with this story isn't done.
yeah, it really is.
Um,
It really is. So
and then it just cites the writers, which it
yeah,
says, from writer Bryan Hill, Postal, and artist Nelson Blake. The second Magdalena
yeah,
is
Magdalena. Yeah,
which that's an Image title, yeah.
that is part of the extended Witchblade universe. Witchblade
Got it.
universe
But
over
this
at
book
Top
came
Cow. So,
before Postal, right?
I don't know if it. I think it came after. I think it came after.
I
I
guess
think
it would have to if it's in the
yeah,
solicit that way.
yeah. It came after. It came after. So
So anyway, I mean, how did you find it? How do you find anything? I mean, did you read about it online? Did you just see the book on the shelf and say that looks kind of cool?
I think I remember this seeing it on the shelf and I picked it up digitally. I don't have the single issues in print. I bought them digitally from Comixology at the time when it was a functional and useful website, which it now currently isn't, thanks to being bought by Amazon and absorbed into the Kindle family. But back then, Comixology was a great place to buy and discover new things. But I don't think I saw it on the shelf. I probably just saw it like in the what's new or whatever, like just browsing
Well,
titles
you also use
on my
like League
tablet.
of Comic Geeks, and
Well, yeah, oh,
so you probably look at everything from every major publisher.
I did, but I didn't see it there. I'm almost positive I just saw it on the main home screen on Comixology, kind of scrolling through, seeing what's there, just seeing the cover, being like, "What is this? I don't know what this is." Seeing that first issue and buying it and going from there, and really liking the world. So seeing it that way, but yeah, I don't have the physical issues. How did you come to it? Because this is early on in your
Yeah,
ongoing comic reading
this
career, right?
was yeah at the time I was pulling this in St. Louis, which I was thinking it came out in summer of 2016, maybe October is like what they stamp on the issue,
And in
and
2017, and in 27 October 2017, yeah, it was 2017, not 2016.
it was definitely 16 because I
Oh no,
lived in
yeah, I'm
another
sorry, it
city.
was, yeah, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
my bad, it was,
and I was like, there's no way I drove to St. Louis to pull my like Batman and Flash and pulled up another one. But anyway, this employee at my shop, I wish I could remember her name, and in fact, I can't even remember what the name of the shop was at the time. This was like a pivotal month in the life of that shop. because the owner of my shop um, decided he couldn't take it in St. Louis about a month after this issue came out in November 2016. He did not like the way the election went and just said, "Screw it, I'm leaving the Midwest," and moved to California and sold the shop. Uh,
Okay.
so uh, now my fond memories of my shop in St. Louis, it has moved locations, it has changed ownership, it has changed names. So certainly the employee who I was talking to is not there anymore. If
But the shop
she
still exists though, right? It's
Oh
still in
yeah, no,
business.
it's
Okay.
huge. It's Apotheosis Comic Lounge. Like they now have like coffee and beer, and like they do stand-up comedy
Oh,
nights.
oh wow.
It's
Okay.
super cool.
And one of those
Um
places like an Isotope or oh, what's the place in LA that's like that? I'm blanking on it now, but yeah, they're kind of the hybrid shop. It's more of a
yeah, but
chill.
they got a ton of issues. I mean, they do a lot of trades, but they have good back catalog of issues
That's good.
that they're usually clearing out. They're not like collectors
Uh,
fodder.
That's because
It's just
a
like
lot of shops that do that are new issues, and their back issues are just like the last 6, 7 months. They don't have
yeah,
because a lot of them don't have
it's a
space
little
and
more
trades.
extensive than that,
Okay.
but they also buy in collections. So, I think
Okay.
they'll buy in a
Yeah.
big collection, keep the top 10% of it that they want, and then just put a big sale bin out with
Yeah.
long boxes for a buck a piece or something. So anyway, at this shop, I had walked up and was talking to the shop worker, and I said, well, what are you reading? Because I think I had gone in, I read that one of the best graphic novels released in 2016 was a Batman book by Paul Dini. And I was asking her about it, and she said, like, I've never heard of that. And I pulled up the picture of it. She's like, I've never seen that.
Was that
Um,
the true story one, the Dark Knight?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I was asking about that. She hadn't heard of it. I ended up getting it, and it was great, and I loved it. In fact, I would like to talk about it on the podcast sometime. Um, if we ever get into a Paul Dini era, which I never thought I would say. But anyway, I said, yeah, well, what do you read? And at the time, I was pulling probably 4 or 5 Rebirth titles, and that was about it.
Yeah.
It was like, Batman, Flash, Green Arrow. I started with Aquaman and Rebirth, but I think I bailed after about 12 issues. And then I was also reading something else in the Nightwing, or Nightwing was one. Yeah.
I mean, so man,
Uh,
this would have been if we're talking fall 2016. I mean, we're talking like
like $2.99 a piece.
well, we're like 2 months in at most, 2, 3 months in. I mean, the Rebirth special was in May, I believe, May or June of
Yeah.
2016,
I
and
was
those books
thinking,
started in the summer. They started so even maybe like four or
but
five. Maybe,
they were shipping twice a month, all of them.
well, not all of them were. Batman was,
Flash was.
Flash was, Green Arrow actually might have at the
I think it
start.
did because I remember when it
I think
switched.
Green Arrow.
It was like one
Yeah,
of the
I think
first ones to switch to
it
monthly.
did. It did. I think
Um,
Nightwing was once a month, but yeah, a lot of those books were double shipping, 2.99, but they were double shipping. But yeah, so
but anyway, so
that's right at the
I
start.
said, yeah, I said, so what are you reading? And she was like, oh well, I mostly read indie stuff. I'm not really into capes. And I was like, oh yeah, totally. As I was standing there with a huge stack of DC Rebirth, I was like, well, like I was like I don't know, show me. I'm like, I read like the James Bond stuff from
Dynamite,
Dynamite.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I had read a couple other things, but like back then to me, an indie comic was like Watchmen, which is technically DC, but
Yes,
it
yeah,
wasn't like a it wasn't like what you saw
yeah.
adapted for movies and stuff.
It
She
was
was
still a
like,
superhero comic, though, right?
right. So
Yeah.
she was like, oh, Mo, my favorite issue of the month is this one. And she handed me a Romulus #1. And I was like, what's it about? And she's like, it's like cult conspiracy, spy, espionage, ninja. Like, it was like just the
All those
list.
words apply. All
Yeah,
those words
no, the
apply.
list just kept going. And I was like, I don't know how, like holding the issue. I'm like, is it larger than it seems? Is it really thin paper? And I was like, all right, well, I have to try that. It sounds crazy. And so got it, and I actually read it on my walk home. I had like a 1.5 mile walk to my comic shop, which the parking there was so terrible that it was worth just walking. And I was walking through a park, so I was like, I can read a comic and walk through a park. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And I think it took until like page 3, because listeners who listen to my gripes and praises will know I have very specific criteria. I enjoy a small cast of characters. I don't like 40 partially developed characters. I want a core set that we really spend a lot of time with. I want good world building, but like you got to rip the bandit off. Like I don't like slowly pulling back just half inch at a time for like 40 issue slow drip. This is like 3 pages.
You get a big dump,
Um,
and yeah, the first the first
but it
the
doesn't
first
feel
like
like
10
a
the
right.
first 10 pages are backstory. So
Right. And I know, like, I don't think you meant this in a derogatory. I don't consider it an exposition dump. Like, I think it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
well done.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, there are worse ways to do it. So
there's
you read
good
this on your
momentum
walk
to
home.
it.
You
So I
read this
read
on
it
your
on my
walk
walk
home.
home and I called and I was like, yep, pull it. And then I moved to Cincinnati in January 2017. And so I was like determined not to miss an issue. So I called my friend Drew, who was on the podcast a few weeks ago. I was like, Drew, where do you get your comics in Cincinnati? And he's like, oh yeah, here's where I go. And I called them and I like wanted to set up a pull list. And I was like, here's what I'm moving. I want to make sure I don't miss any issues because when this stuff is shipping twice a week and like some of those rebirth titles were kind of hot commodities as they came out, like would go to second, third, fourth printings.
Yeah,
I was like, I don't want to be left out on a series that I'm following. Um, so anyway, all of this to say, uh, I was given a recommendation from a comic shop owner who no longer owns a comic shop or works in a comic shop. Uh, and I moved states while this series was finishing, which is incredible because it was only 4 issues.
yeah.
And then I had to finish it in another city. And then I didn't know. Like this is why I love if you have not listened to it, go back in our catalog and find Mark Russell reading his introduction to the Flintstones because he talks about his first time writing for DC. He wrote a book called Prez,
Mhm.
which was a 12 issue series, and he mapped it out like here's the 12 issues I'm going to write, and they canceled after 6. And he's like, I didn't know that could happen. Like I didn't know you could write half a book, and they're like, cool, we published the first half of your book and we're just not going to publish the rest of it. It's like that doesn't happen in prose novels.
Yeah.
Um, and I had that same kind of bitter experience, and I had, uh, I would like to think it's not an angry Karen email, but I definitely sent an email to Image Comics. I was like, "What?
Oh man,
Where is this? Like, what's happening?" And they very politely said, like, yeah, okay." So they said,
you got a response.
"Yeah, I got a response
Oh wow.
within a week."
Oh
I
wow.
said, "Hi, I read Romulus issues 1 through 4 and loved them. I know that run ended, but I'm wondering if there will be a second story arc, and if so, when will it come out? I can't find any info on your website." That was June 28th, 2017. And July 6th, they said, "Thanks for your email. We currently don't have any plans to release another arc for Romulus. Please keep an eye on the website for any announcements regarding that issue or regarding that series. Thank you." So super cool that they sent me an email back.
Okay, I'm legitimately shocked by that. So
Yeah,
okay.
it's like I will say at the same time, another series for another publisher did the same thing. I emailed them and still have not heard back. So I don't know if Black Mask will be continuing the Skeptics. The last issue was about 8 years ago. So I'm starting to lose hope.
Yeah.
But that was a
So
cool Cold War era book that I
yeah.
was really into at the time.
So I guess we should answer the question here. Why this one in particular? And I think this is a book for Mike and I has some meaning because this is probably one of the first conversations we ever had about comics.
Yeah.
There was a day at the shop. It was a Wednesday. I was in getting my books, and I believe you were there. And you already mentioned Drew Hood, who was we talked to a few weeks ago. If you go back and listen to our discussion about Batman Long Halloween, the three of us were there, and I didn't know either of you guys. I'm not certain I've ever. It's quite possibly the first time I'd ever seen you guys or met you guys or talked to you guys. You're just other dudes in the comic shop.
Right.
And at some point we were talking with the owner of the shop, Kendall, just about like what was coming out, what had been out, what had been reading, steady industry, things like that. And at some point this is the previous location of our shop. We were standing back and looking at the racks of recent back issues, which is, this is the mostly indie and kind of
Right, because
non
like
big two.
Batman has his own section,
Yeah,
Superman
Batman
has
has a
his own section.
section.
Yeah,
Exactly. Wonder Woman, X-Men, Star Wars had a section, things like that. This is the stuff that they put, from the last 5, 6 months, whatever, before it gets bagged and boarded and into a long box. They leave the recent stuff out there, whatever their overflow inventory is, just in case you missed a week or two. You go there and you look for your books. And I think the three of us were just kind of looking at the Rex, they're talking about what you've read, what was good, what was bad, this is blah blah blah. And I think at one point you pointed out Romulus, and so this would have been probably summer of 2017 after the last issue had come out, and
right.
and what the book, it was clear the book wasn't coming back, and you pointed that one out, and I was like, yeah, I read that book, that was cool. It's like I wish it would have continued, and I think you made some comment at that point about how you made some comment about how you were frustrated that the book was canceled, and maybe at this point this was after you'd already sent this email, which I'm now just learning about, to Image, but you had frustration about how it was a good setup and all of this, and then it was canceled, and how they do that, and that was our like first real conversation about comics. And because to me it's like, oh yeah, that happens, it was a
Well,
cool idea, but if no one read it, no one bought it, they're not going to print it,
but
it
also
doesn't
I
matter
was
what's in the
standing there
book.
talking to you because those kind of conversations in the comic shop, it's how I found Romulus.
Yes, yes,
And so
yeah,
it's like now I'm going to talk to anybody who's in the comic shop.
yeah,
Sometimes you can tell people really don't want it. I do leave them alone.
yeah.
But if anyone like, if I look at someone's hand and they're holding like a Tom King book, I'm like, all right, what else do you read? Like,
Yeah.
what am I missing? Like, if you're reading, if you like that, you're probably reading other things, and chances are you probably got something I don't have. So I trust your taste. Tell me what to read.
Well,
Um,
and I mean that's a sign of a good shop. I think the your shop in St. Louis there, that the girl who's working there, yeah. When someone asks, hey, what are you reading? A good owner, a good employee is going to have a few titles that they like, and hopefully, I what I hope for is they're not just being like, yeah, I love Batman, I love Amazing Spider-Man. It's like those books don't need help, but there's got to be
right.
something that they're reading, hopefully, that they can direct you into. Hey, here's the thing that I like, that I want more people to read, I want to shine some light on. Being someone who works or owns a comic shop, you have that platform for your customers, that like, yeah, folks are going to read Marvel and DC stuff, like those books don't need help selling. But if there's like an indie book out there that they really love because, they're picking up, they're seeing all the covers, they're seeing all the issues coming out, something grabbed their attention and they read it. You would hope for, I would hope for, that when you go to a shop, they're going to recommend something that you haven't heard of, and not just, oh, here's the book that's going to sell the most this week because we have 100 copies of it, because we know they're all going to sell. And so when you have something like that, and if you can find that kind of community in a comic shop, which I think is so important, and because yeah, there's so many comics, there's so many great comics, there's so many mediocre comics, there's so many bad comics out there, and obviously no one can read everything. But if you go in there and especially if you're a regular and you're there on a Wednesday and you're there at about the same time every Wednesday, the same kind of people show up every day or every week, you can strike up those conversations and talk to people. If you have no idea who they are, you just know that they share this one hobby that you have, and again, that is literally how I met you and Drew, just being at the comic shop at the same time, talking to them, talking to people, what books you're reading, what did you like, what didn't you like, and finding that common ground there. And for you, for Mike and I, this random book that probably no one has heard of, Romulus, was one of those books. It was one of the books that stuck out for both of us, that we had both read and have probably now to this point have not met anyone else who's read. I don't believe, right? Have you read anyone else?
No,
read this book?
I mean, and there are people who like, I've been like going through bins with people
Mhm.
at like conventions and stuff, and I'll see this book in the dollar bin, which,
Yeah,
because like if you're a shop owner and they, you
yeah,
got a little bit of interest in it, you order 10 copies or whatever, people find out like, oh, is she forced the last one? And they just abandon their pool, or they,
yeah.
or they're not pulling and they just don't buy it, and then you're stuck with, $50 for the books or whatever. And it just ends up in the dollar bin fodder. So anyway, I've like pulled them out and like, dude, this $4. If you promise to read it, I'll buy it for you. Like if I'm like, just it's great. And like, to me, I want it to be like Firefly, where it's just like heralded as like the great thing. And I think that's what you and I throughout the course of this podcast have kind of used it as like just like the go-to example of like
Yeah.
and the other side of this coin is like Morning
I was
Glories.
going to say the other one is Morning Glories. Yes, and they
Yeah,
got a long run,
it
but
still didn't finish.
well, it wrapped up that story, but it was very clear that it was a cliffhanger or something else. This book barely wraps up that, like there's no conclusion there. The story and like there's a rest. It comes to a pause, but it's very much like it, these 4 issues end the setup for what the actual story is going to be. Like this book didn't have time to get the actual story. And so I think, do you think now, like if you're at a convention, you find these books and whoever you're with, you're like, hey man, read these 4 books. It's only these 4. Do you think it's helpful for this book that you can tell someone it's never going to finish? It is a wild cliffhanger, but if you know that going in and you take this for what it is, as like an intro story to a world that seemingly could have gone on a lot longer. Do you find that's helpful for this book specifically, knowing that you could tell someone, hey, it's unfinished, it got canceled, it's only 4 issues, it's not a hard read at all, but you're going to get to the end and you're going to want more, and it's not going to be there, it's never coming back? Do you feel that helps this book as a selling
I
point
think
now?
it really depends on the type of nerd you're with. If it is someone who likes Firefly and they love the persecuted fan complex like I do, where it's like, I can't believe this was taken away from, because it's like this is like a great pilot episode of a show that never got picked up.
Yeah, I was gonna say the difference. Yeah, right. This is because it's set up. This ends and it's good setup and it's clear what the story is actually about. It starts in issue 5. We just never get it. So I think the better thing would be, yeah, it's a great pilot.
Yeah.
It's an awesome pilot that people it's heralded, they saw it, but no one buys it. And it gets leaked to YouTube a few years later, and people are like, man, did you watch this pilot? It was really good. I can't believe they didn't make, this didn't go to series. I can't believe no one picked this up. That's what I think is a little more apt comparison. But yeah, I understand what you're trying to say. This idea that if you go into something knowing it's unfinished, knowing it's unresolved, it changes your perception of what you're gonna get versus what you and I went through reading it as it came out.
Yeah, because it really did feel like this is my indie book for the next couple years or something. I mean,
Yeah.
Like, so if you had to guess based on these first 4 issues, how long of a series do you think? Like, if you didn't know what you know, how long would you have expected this to?
I would say at least 12, which is which would be 3 4-story arcs.
Yeah.
I think at least 12 would have made perfect sense for this. It could have gone a lot in any however direction they went, but in terms of that general story structure, and I think we can talk more about this next week. But I can very much easily see a beginning, middle, end to this type of story. And if it were 12 issues, I think that would have been enough time to really set the world and explore it with the characters we have here. Again, obviously, I think, but the setup for a type of book like this could have easily run, upwards of 25 or 30. I think without breaking a sweat. I think the world is set up in a way.
That's what I was gonna say.
And the premise is it easily could have done that.
I've read the first trade of Postal, and if you ask me which one goes longer, Postal or Romulus, I'd be like Romulus. Yeah. Like there's so much more runway for Romulus.
The world is much more expansive. But again, we can get a little more of that next week when we talk about the actual story and the specifics there. But yeah, I said I don't think it is out of the realm of possibility when it was first coming out to think that this is going to be at least a decently long, and right. or actually think it's going to be an ongoing, and not just get lopped off at full. So
yeah, it's heartbreaking, but that is the world of comics, and
it is.
we gotta appreciate what we got from it, and as a bonus, I got introduced to a writer who I now enjoy, because I read Postal as a result of Romulus, not the other way around.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's like like even when a book quote unquote fails, and I don't know if the book failed or if the creators just decided like, we got other things, we got for hire work coming in.
Absolutely, we should say that books get canceled for all sorts of reasons. And again, there's probably a story there as to why issues 1, 2, 3 came out in consecutive months, and then it was a 5-month gap to the fourth one. Maybe what was going on there, was delays on someone's end, writer's end, artist's end, publisher's end. Who knows? But that's not a great sign. But yeah, you're right. It could be a number of things. I get the sense, though, just anecdotally, since literally no one knows about this book, I'm guessing no one really read it. I'm guessing sales weren't great. Which is, it's how it goes sometimes. A book comes out there and if it doesn't find its audience right away, a book can be DOA. And it feels like that's what happened with Romulus. But yeah, it could have been a number of factors.
Yeah. Anyway, you can find it in dollar bins everywhere. The trade you can usually find at the library, but also in clearance bins or
used bookstore.
Used bookstore, wherever.
You can definitely get it digitally. You can buy it online. Again, best of luck with what Comixology is now through the Kindle store, but it's there. You can get it, so it's available.
Yeah, as long as you don't mind it showing up in your Kindle Paperwhite as if you're going to read a comic there.
Well, I mean, that's why you got if you're going to read comics digitally, you have to have some level of fairly decent tablet. Yeah. You can't read it on an e-reader.
Yeah, Samsung has the best screens, but in my humble opinion. But anyway, all right. Well, we will see you next week. Read all 4 issues and come ready to talk about that whole list of crazy stuff that was given to me in my sales pitch. It's conspiracies, it's ninjas, it's espionage, it's just incredible, fast-paced world building with a likable character.
I think so. I think it's a really good setup for something that when you get to the end, you want to get more, and that there is a level of sadness knowing that you're just not going to. But if you take it for what it's worth, going in that it's not going to be complete. I think there's still a lot to this book to enjoy, and I can't wait to get into it next week.
All right. Well, follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, wherever. We really just need to stop saying Facebook. Like, we have a group there we do not use.
Yeah.
We're not great at posting. I've been lagging terribly behind on social media. But follow us all those places. We do eventually get current. And, the more likes, retweets, interactions we get, the more it makes us look like a real podcast and bring more creators on to talk. So anyway, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.